Today we're looking at the difference between if and whether. Now I want to start by explaining one simple thing, or maybe not so simple. I have read on a website concerning a particular American exam which tests grammar, but according to American rules, I read today that if cannot be used in any of these examples that we're going to look at today in accepted American grammar for this particular exam, for the GMAT. However, I've certainly heard it used many times if as identical to whether, and I think that we use it almost identically to whether. However, in this particular exam, the first forms of if are actually incorrect, and you should use whether in these cases. So I've taken this grammar actually from the Cambridge Dictionary. However, I actually find the American approach more logical and less ambiguous. I think the American approach is correct, actually, that we should say whether in all of these situations because it's a different word from if. And the American approach is that we only use if in conditionals, first, second, third, mixed conditionals, but we don't use if in these kind of sentences. Nonetheless, Cambridge is correct that in speech we use it like this all the time. So firstly, if is a little less formal than whether. It sounds rather informal, first thing to note. And secondly, in Cambridge Dictionary this is acceptable. I don't know if I'll come. We say this kind of thing all the time. Now, we can also say, I don't know whether I'll come. But in Cambridge, we can say, I don't know if I'll come. That's fine. And we can do this because there's only one option here. If there are two options, then we must use whether. But if there's one option, then we must use if. So, I don't know if I'll come, or find out if he would like some cake. Now, please notice that here if is with will, and here if is with would in the same clause. This is not possible in conditionals. And so I want to make it clear that this is not a conditional if. It's a different kind of if, and that's why I think the Americans are perhaps quite wise to just say that we should use a different word. However, we don't, and so I still take the Cambridge Dictionary's point that this is actually how English is used. We do use if in these sentences. I actually think we use if in any of these sentences when people are speaking and they don't care about grammar. They certainly would use if in any of these sentences. It's the informal version. Nonetheless, there are some situations when we can only use whether. By the way, we can use whether in these two. That's perfectly acceptable, and you must if you're doing this exam, the GMAT. But I don't know whether I'll come. Find out whether he'd like some cake. They're both correct as well. But we must use whether in these three situations according to Cambridge Dictionary Online. So, if we have two options, A or B, we ought to use whether. Now again, they actually say in Cambridge that if there's an or not, we can use if instead of whether. I think that's really getting very inconsistent, so I would forget that if I were you. I would just remember, if there are two options, I asked whether we should do this or do the opposite. Yeah, notice the parallelism, whether we should do this or do the opposite. I asked whether he'll come or not. Yeah, that's two options, whether he'll come or not. So if there are two options, please use whether. After prepositions, we ought to use whether. I'm not interested in whether he's coming or not. So after in, we must use whether, not if. And we argued about whether his behaviour had been rude. Yeah, not we argued about if. It does sound very bad then. In some of these it sounds very bad. You couldn't possibly use if here. We never would use if here, even in speech. And lastly, we ought to use whether with to plus infinitive. I don't know whether to stay or to go. Note the parallel forms. But I don't know whether to stay or to go. So here we've got two options, and it's to plus infinitive. So please use whether before to plus infinitive. But remember that for some grammarians, for some for the Chicago Manual of Style, perhaps, we should only use whether for all of these sentences, because whether is the one which is used for two options or for these kind of sentences where there's no condition. Actually, I don't know if he'll come. There's no condition here. I don't know whether he'll come. They want to see whether in a lot of exams, so maybe you should get into the habit of only using whether for all of these. That's your decision. Okay, thanks for watching. Just a small lesson today about that particular topic. If you have any other questions about if and whether, please put them under the video, and I hope to see you all soon.